Hello everyone, my name is Sally. I'm 16 years old. Did your parents ever suffer from pain? You don't know, do you? Many of us do not notice their parents' problems. Really, dad and mom can handle everything. How can they have problems? And I'll tell you what, if it weren't for my mother's problems, it would be much easier for me to live. Watch this video to the end and find out why she tried to kill me. My mother broke up with my stepfather a few years ago. At first, I was happy. It was a difficult, toxic relationship in which both were unhappy. My stepfather is not a bad person at all. It was just that he and my mother behaved like rare fools, constantly hurting each other. I hoped that their lives would be better. It actually happened, but not to my mother. She suffered greatly after parting with him, constantly crying, sometimes drinking, and could not get out of bed. I was very scared for her. I had no idea how to behave or what to do. I also had problems. No one offended me, but against this background, my hormonal balance decided to say, well, screw me. I got monstrous pimples. I easily got fat, easily fell into sadness, and there was a reason. Not only because of my mother, but all my friends had boyfriends, were busy with something, and knew what they wanted to do in their future. Would you be able to pull yourself together in such a situation? I had only enough strength left to crawl home, feed my mother and cat, and sit down to watch TV. Of course, with this lifestyle, it was not surprising that I didn't have anyone. But then, it got even worse. My friend Melina had an accident and she called me in tears. I asked her what happened. She told me a very scary story. Her aunt had postpartum depression and nearly strangled her daughter, Melina's cousin. I started asking Melina about what had happened, and I felt very uneasy. This story was one in one my own. Just like my mother, Melina's aunt was going through a divorce and even with a small child in her arm. She was sad and switched from hysteria to apathy. Sometimes she said that she would be better off without her daughter. Except that my mother didn't watch outside my door at night. Yeah, that's what I thought. Naive. I woke up the next night and wanted to go out for water. And then I saw my mother was standing outside my door, holding a pillow. Can you imagine how scared I was? Mom, I told her, what are you doing? Go back to sleep. I had to take her to her bedroom as if she was a little girl. That's when I was really scared. Damn, what if she did something weird too? Would kill her daughter, for example? Were you afraid that your family might harm you? I didn't have that kind of fear before, but now I do. Here we were sitting having dinner and suddenly, honey, how do you want to be buried? Or here was another case. She was cooking something for once, then froze, came to me with a knife, and then left the house. She said afterwards that she had been far away. I don't want to know what she was thinking about. And of course, my favorite. I came home from school a little later than usual, and there was no Wi-Fi. I asked my mom what the hell was going on, and she told me, give me your phone. I hesitated, but then I gave it to her. She took it and went to her room to sleep, leaving me with no way to call for help if someone decided to kill me, right? I took the phone from her, of course, but after that, I couldn't look at her and stop worrying about my life. What if she thought I was the reason she had broken up with her husband? Okay, she finally decided to go to her therapist. I was all for it, and even volunteered to accompany her. But I was not allowed in the office. They said this was not a family consultation, and that they treated mental health here. Then I slipped into the washroom, climbed to the vent, and listened to what was going on. Suddenly, my mother very loudly exclaimed, "Yes, I'm ready to kill her!" She did not even hide her desire. I could hardly wait for her to be released. We went home, and I still couldn't look at her. My mother was crying and didn't seem to pay any attention to me at all. I was very sorry for her, but I was even more afraid for myself. My mother was now completely deranged, out of control. Why did the doctor let her go? Would you be frightened in my place? When I got home, I hid all the knives, all the scissors, locked all my scarves and belts in the garage. I didn't know what to do with the pillows. My mother told me that a long time ago, a nurse who looked after old people and smothered them with pillows was imprisoned. I hoped my mother wouldn't have thought of that. The most important thing was to stay alert. I handled it as well as I could. My mother didn't go to bed at night. I casually walked into the kitchen and calculated her sleeping pills. So today, she decided not to sleep. What for? I went out and watched her. Here she was making tea, 2 cups, and added something into the second mug from a small bottle. I went into the kitchen and asked if everything was all right. My mother said that she needed to talk to me. I said, "Great, but let's move into the room, okay?" She didn't argue, so we took tea and came to my place. My mother hesitated, then suddenly asked why I didn't drink tea. I realized I couldn't wait any longer, so I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I need to go check something." Not much of an excuse, but I ran out of the room and locked it with a key. Great. Now she wouldn't run away, and I could call the police. A police squad quickly arrived to the teenager's call for help. I led them to the room, opened the door, and screamed in horror. Mom decided to hang herself with a bag strap. They quickly removed her, called an ambulance, put a bear in my hands, and told me not to worry. I yelled that I couldn't help but worry, and I wanted to be close to my mom. They told me that everything would be all right and told me to call one of my relatives. I said okay, and then I snuck out and rushed to the nearest hospital. My mother was there, but they refused to let me go to see her, saying that she was in an unstable state, and again ordered to call someone from the older relatives. Damn it! Stop with your relatives! I pretended to agree again, then went outside and walked along the first floor windows. Once again, I was extremely lucky. She was actually almost there. Only I had to wait almost half the night for the doctors to leave her. I heard that she was being discharged in the morning, but she would inevitably be met by the police, and damn, they could take me away from her. Yes, she wanted to kill me, but heck! I knocked firmly on the window. She opened it. I climbed in and asked how she was. Suddenly, my mother burst into tears. She dropped her head in my lap and begged me to forgive her. Was this a confession? No. It turned out that she didn't want to kill me. She didn't want to kill anyone. Well, not exactly. She was very angry with the new Mircos, this was my stepfather's name, woman, and she imagined wringing her neck once or twice. But my mother didn't want to hurt me at all. But her depression was getting worse, and she had thoughts of death, and that was what she was discussing with the doctor. She was prescribed stronger medication, but she was afraid that she wouldn't be a good mother to me, so she decided to talk to me. And she put a sedative in her tea, not for me, but for herself. Silly me. I just filled in the rest. We were sitting and crying. The next morning, the guardianship authorities came to us, and they were ready to take me away from my family. I had to stay with my uncle for a while, but everyone vouched for my mother. Me, my uncle, the psychoanalyst, even Mirko and his wife. As a result, I was returned to her. They simply obligated me to go to family consultations and once a month to put up custody inspector. We agreed. My mother began to talk to me more often. Before, she was ashamed to complain about her life, but now she seemed to burst in response. I shared my problems with her, acne, friends, and all that. We couldn't solve each other's problems, but we tried to support each other at least. Listen to your parents. What if they can't be happy too? Subscribe to our channel and send us your stories. Put a like if you like this video. Then YouTube will send it to other viewers.
Hi, my name is Cora. I'm 14. My mom protects me from guys. I can't kiss them, meet them, talk to them, or even think about them. Have you tried to fight the control of your parents by their own methods? Watch this video to the end and find out how this unwanted pregnancy helped me. It's kind of weird that I met Matt. Of course, no dating, no going to the movies together. We rarely got to be together. We took every opportunity to sit next to each other in the school cafeteria, to say a few words to each other in the corridor, to be in the same group in a science class. It was like a spy movie instant love. He even wrote to me from a fake account like a girl. And then Matt came up with a cool thing. He signed up for volleyball just in time for my gym class. And we could be together for 2 hours while our parents thought we were practicing. For a month, everything was normal. We just sat there talking about stuff. It was freedom. But then, my coach called my mom. He said he hadn't seen me for a long time. My mother gave me a real interrogation. I said I was tired of sports, so instead of going to the gym, I went to the mall with my friends. My mother told me to tell the coach that I was leaving the gym. But after that conversation, she literally followed me. She met me and accompanied me everywhere, except she did not hold my hand. Do you feel like your parents are controlling you too much? Write in the comments how you noticed it. I texted Matt that it was best we didn't talk while Mom kept an eye out for me. Maybe later she would get over it and we could see each other again. But he said he wanted to talk to me and asked me to come out to the playground behind the school after third period. I told Matt how my mother was watching me. He was nodding understandingly, and then suddenly he kissed me. It was like being happy. First kiss. It seemed like an eternity. And then I noticed that the principal was looking at us from the window, and he didn't seem to like it. I went home as if to an execution. I thought my mother would keep me at home until I was old. But there was no scandal at home. I even thought the principal hadn't said anything to my mother. Only in the evening, my mother told me that in the morning we would go to the doctor to check my health. She said responsible people take care of themselves before they get sick. The doctor was suddenly a gynecologist. He asked me a lot about what I had with guys. I honestly said that I had nothing at all. He nodded and then began to describe the horrors of intimacy with pictures and stories from life. 3 children by the age of 15, terrible diseases, poverty, crime, death. Wow, he should be making horror movies. My mother and I didn't talk about it again. A couple of days later, my phone died, and Matt was supposed to write to me. My mom wasn't home, so I decided to read his message from my mom's computer. My mom's mail was open, and I was about to roll it up so I wouldn't have to peek when I saw my name in the subject line of one of the emails. I wondered who she was texting about me behind my back. Oppa! A familiar face! In general, the same gynecologist turned out to be an old friend of my mother. And all these horror stories he told me at her request. Well, thank you, Mummy. I was beside myself with rage. My mother got tired of controlling me and decided to intimidate me. Well, I would not remain in debt. I, too, could frighten my beloved mother if necessary. Fortunately, I knew what she was afraid of. So Matt and I came up with a plan. For starters, Matt bought us medallions with our initials on them. And I put my own with the first letter of his name under my mother's seat. The next day, I asked my mother if she had forgotten that she was going to wash the car. And she went to the car wash. And there was a surprise waiting for her. She didn't say anything to me, but I could see that the plan was working. Matt lent me his t-shirt, and I buried it in the laundry basket. Mom checked every piece of clothing before she threw it in the washing machine. So she noticed the t-shirt. And then she didn't hold back. She made a fuss about where this filthy stuff came from in our decent house. Well, I went crazy too. Well, I didn't start yelling. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I so casually answered her, saying that my boyfriend forgot after it. We had it for a long time and often. Then I took a deep breath and added that I thought I was pregnant. My mother ran out the door as if I'd shown her a rattlesnake. The next day, I came home to find Matt at our house and with his parents. My mother was a detective genius. She figured out Matt from the tag on his t-shirt and called his parents to meet. And then we had a serious conversation in the living room. Matt and I tried to explain that it was all a lie, that we made up the whole pregnancy story, but they just didn't listen to us. It was like we had just become invisible. I didn't know what they agreed to do. We were simply kicked out of the room as if it didn't concern us. Don't you think it's crazy when adults listen to anyone but you in decisions related to you? And then my mother dragged me to the gynecologist. That gynecologist. He shook his head, saying that he had warned me. I explained to him that it was all a prank, that there was no pregnancy. I was a virgin and all that. He didn't believe it, but then he saw for himself that it was nothing more than a kiss. He said it was wrong to cheat. Well, that's when I reacted. So it was not good to cheat, but it was good to bully me at my mother's request? And to spy on me, to control every step? He hesitated and said that after all, nothing was invented, everything was only true. It was not that big a deal that he put it on thick. Then he asked for a long time how my mother controlled me. He told me that she took care of me, and sometimes it just went beyond the bounds of reason. The doctor seemed to realize that he had been wrong. He called my mother, and they had a long conversation. Then, in the car, my mother suddenly said that she was probably wrong, but she was too worried about me. We talked a lot in the car. My mother remembered how her grandmother used to keep an eye on her, much more than she did on me. There were no mobile phones, so my mother had to constantly look for a payphone to call my grandmother. My grandmother also forbade her to leave the house if her skirt was above the knee, and I explained that I was quite responsible for communicating with boys. There were boys I just wanted to be friends with, go to the movies, talk about stuff, not hide from my mom. And then there was Matt, who I thought I loved. When we got home, Matt's parents were waiting for us. Matt's mom said that she's thought it all out, and we just had to get rid of the baby. It was too early for Matt and me to have kids or even date. They said that they watched Matt carefully, made him call them every hour, tell them where he was and what was wrong with him. And it was terrible, me who seduced him, because Matt was still very young. I realized that Matt's parents were just as afraid for him as my mother was for me. Maybe it meant that Matt and I were meant for each other. Or just all parents were like that? Matt's parents growled at my mom, but they attacked the wrong one. She quickly explained to them that first, there was no pregnancy, second, it was none of their business, and third, Matt was already a big enough boy to be looked after like a baby. What a turn! Matt and I even went to the mirror to see how we had grown up so suddenly. Matt said it was our plan that worked so well. and our folks suddenly found a common language. My mother said that since we were dating, they should get acquainted again. Matt's parents shook Mom's hand, and then they sat around all night drinking lemonade and talking about stuff. Matt and I are still dating. His folks no longer require him to call them every hour with a report. And my mom has become a little more relaxed about my dates with Matt. Our parents decided that we were responsible and we can be given a little more freedom. You may ask if we had it. I'll tell you what, this is between me and Matt and no one else in the world. That's how I showed my mother that I was old enough and she could trust me. Of course, it could have been done in a more peaceful way, but it seems to have turned out more clearly. Put a like if you like my story. Subscribe to the channel. There will be a lot more interesting things here. Click the bell icon to avoid missing anything. Trust your loved ones and help them trust you. Have a happy day.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm 16 years old. Do you know what a life of lies is? Did somebody hide from you the truth for many years that you had a right to know? I experienced it myself, and it was disgusting. Watch to the end and find out what it's like to deal with the terrible consequences of something that has been hidden from you for a long time. Many people thought I was very lucky. I have a very caring mother, and my father is a big shot in our city. I was specifically pampered. My parents were literally turned on me, and all the whims were fulfilled almost at the click. But as I grew up, I began to feel as if my parents were trying to placate me. They avoided looking me in the eye, smiled shyly, whispered and stopped talking when I approached. It was strange, wasn't it? When I started middle school, Dr. Hoffman came to see me once a month, and we had a heartfelt conversation, and he prescribed me some kind of pills for good health. My mother told me they were vitamins, but I doubted it. Did you ever get the feeling that your parents were lying to you? This was not very pleasant. As soon as I raised this question, everyone left the subject. Mom and Dad locked themselves in their bedroom with a doctor and talked to him for an hour, sometimes 2. It's a shame, don't you agree? I decided to act on my own. One evening, when Doc and I finished our conversation, I decided to end all this endless silence. I crawled into my parents' bedroom and hid under their bed. I listened to their conversation and couldn't breathe. I was in such a deep shock. They were talking about how crazy I was, that my condition was bothering them, that I should be admitted to the hospital. Yes, it was about a psychiatric hospital where my own parents wanted to take me. The doctor talked to me and brought me pills to treat not my body, but my soul and head. And there was something that still bothered me. Mom and Dad were always arguing about whether it was my father's or my mother's fault, as if it wasn't about them. I suspected something, but how could I get to the truth? I had to play detective. I couldn't just ask my parents. They had already lied to me, so why expect them to tell the truth? But I had a favorite grandma who lived in a nursing home, so I visited her. During tea, I mentioned casually that my mother said she had been in a psychiatric hospital. My grandma frowned and said I was probably referring to my other mother, but quickly covered up the slip. I asked her again, but she said I'd heard something wrong. Outwardly, I was calm, but inside, I was in complete shock. And the secret I had discovered was not quite clear to me. I was in foster care, and my mother was in some kind of clinic. The thought made me angry. If my foster parents were liars, I would have to find her myself. There were several hospitals in our city, and I was trying to figure out which one I should go to. And I also stopped drinking my vitamins, secretly from my parents, of course. I called hospitals and made up a story about looking for a distant relative who I only knew had a daughter the year I was born. Even if they listened to me, they couldn't help me. I decided to break in and go through my father's personal papers. And I found an adoption document signed by the head doctor of the psychiatric hospital. No wonder the search turned up nothing. This facility was located in a neighboring city, and I really had to run away from my home to get there and demand answers to all my questions. At the hospital, I told the story of a distant relative again, but they didn't listen to me. So I hung around and snuck in with a couple. Then I wandered the halls for a long time. And I found an unlocked office with a lot of cabinets. Apparently, they kept patient records here. But while I was thinking about which box to start with, the nurse came back and raised the alarm. I tried to escape and ran into a security guard. He started threatening the police, and I shouted my last name and threatened problems with my father, then burst into tears and added that I just wanted to see my mother. The guard and the nurse were confused and decided to send me to the head doctor. How would you feel if you were on the verge of the biggest secret in your life? My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't breathe. The head doctor was a nice old woman. She offered to have a cup of coffee in her office. This time, I didn't lie and immediately told her about my foster parents and the search for the real ones, and begged her not to call the police and just tell me everything as it was. Then I would leave. The doctor said she couldn't tell me about my parents without permission of my guardians. Instead, she offered to listen to a story about a girl who had nothing to do with me. This girl's father was a rapist, a cruel and terrible man. He abused the girl's mother and abandoned her, and she hated him so much that she couldn't accept her daughter. She suffered terribly for a year and decided to give the baby up for adoption. To find out that I was born just because my mother was horribly abused, that was hard. A lump formed in my throat, and it was a miracle I didn't cry. I wanted to see her, but I was told that she died in this hospital just a year ago. The trauma broke her life and was with her until her death. So I inherited her fear? The doctor shook her head. My mother's disorder was related to her trauma. My illness was a gift from my maniac father. I don't know if this truth broke me, but my behavior has changed. I closed myself off from my parents. It was so hard for me to talk to them, sit at dinner, even cross eyes. Of course they felt it, felt that something unpleasant was weighing me down. And they were damn right. I was frozen with fear, thinking that I was about to turn into a maniac like my real father. I was so scared that one day I couldn't stand it, and I picked up a razor. Fortunately, my parents caught me just as I was making my first incision. I was crying, my mother was crying, and my father was screaming. He just went crazy, telling me how ungrateful I was and how much they had done for me. I started screaming too. I don't remember what it was, but the phrase, "You are not my parents," was repeated several times. God, how embarrassing. Do you know how it all ended? They decided to send me to a psychiatric hospital. A children's hospital, but still a psychiatric hospital, so I wouldn't hurt them or myself. They decided to get rid of me. It was like I was suffocating, on the verge of fainting, or even actually dying. I imagined myself dying here, like my real mother died in that hospital, and I decided to escape from this asylum. And I almost did it. The first night, I opened the window, but at the last moment, I was afraid to jump. I couldn't jump. Yes, I hated myself and the world, and all the more, where should I run? While I was making up my mind, I heard footsteps behind me. Too late. I was caught. Fortunately, it was not a doctor, but another patient my age. He asked me why I decided to run away, and I told him everything that had happened. And he was telling me that my parents didn't get rid of me, that they wanted to help me. And all the anger and suspicion were in me because I had stopped taking the pills a couple of weeks before. But what about my terrible inheritance? The guy suggested that my father, even though he was ill, committed crimes because he was bullied as a child. He took revenge on people for childish insults. And I suddenly remembered very well how much my mother and father did for me, how happy my childhood was. I had nothing to avenge, so there was no danger? I stopped thinking about myself and thought about my parents. about their feelings, and I definitely didn't want to run away. That night, I called my mother and confessed everything. This was such a weight off my mind. I can't tell you how grateful I am to them all. My parents, the head doctor, and that guy. After all the excitement had subsided, I began to miss my mom and dad desperately. It was no longer a secret between us, and I was looking forward to seeing them again. And as a good, exemplary patient, I took pills, went for walks, did therapy. I told my roommates my amazing story, but it quickly turned out that mine wasn't the weirdest yet. After my return, my mother and I had a long, private conversation about my illness. The acute condition has passed, but I will have to carefully monitor my health. When I was lying under the bed, it seemed to me that Mom and Dad were plotting something bad against me. The truth was much simpler. If you want more stories just as interesting and useful, I hope, subscribe to our channel, click on the bell and find out everything first, and let there be no dark secrets in your life.
Hi, my name is Sophie and I'm 16 years old. Do you remove body hair? And if you don't, do you hide it? Watch the video to the end and learn the story of how my strict mother forbade me to shave my hair in private parts and what it cost me in relationships with friends. The most important thing in high school is studying. I'm doing my best because I want to go to college on a scholarship. So I don't have time for boys and relationships. I was asked to date, but I always refused. But then Riley came up to me. Riley himself. All the girls at school want to date him, and I'm no exception. I almost took off when he offered me a ride home. Of course, after that, my existence was remembered. I was rarely invited to parties, not because I was treated badly, but because everybody knew I would refuse. And then all the girls began to insist. Gossipers. But I also wanted to talk, and I was tired of refusing. So when I was invited to a pool party, I agreed. I even took a bathing suit, although I wasn't going to swim. The party was great. I'd forgotten what they were like. But they kept asking me about Riley, and I didn't have anything to say. We had lunch a couple of times at the same table, and he gave me a ride when he could. Nothing special, but everyone listened as if it was the best movie of the season. How do you feel in the center of someone else's attention? Do you like it, or do you feel uncomfortable? Share it in the comments. I realized that this was not for me. It would be nice if the attention was sincere. Sometimes it is nice to be listened to. If you give a report that is done perfectly, or when you talk about a book you have read to those who are interested in it. I was talking about Riley, and everyone liked him anyway, and there weren't my achievements in this. When everyone got tired of questioning me, the girls went to the pool, and then the worst thing that could have happened. They noticed that I didn't take off my perio and go into the water with everyone. I'm sure if it wasn't for all the talk about guys, no one would be looking at me. And then everyone wanted me to swim with them. They decided not to count the refusal as an answer. They started shoving, grabbing my ankles out of the water. By the way, if you fall with a swing, you can break your head. Why were they interested in how I rested and what I wore? They could swim calmly and leave me alone. I shouldn't have come. It's not for nothing that I had always avoided it. I would have stayed at home, read textbooks, and nothing bad would have happened. But I came to the party and I was in a panic about being found out. If I had just been pushed into the water, I would have survived. It's upsetting when people don't listen to you, but I didn't really have a problem with water. I liked to swim, and the water was warm. It was something else entirely, and the girls noticed it too. And they gave me one last chance to explain myself. Anyway, I had to give them a big secret. I was shy to go in a swimsuit as everyone would see my hair sticking out from under my underpants. Of course, they immediately started laughing and asking why I didn't take the time to clean up if I knew where I was going. I made an impenetrable argument. My mother forbade me. What could I do against my mom? The party was one night, and my brain could be taken out for the rest of my life. So in the end, I scolded the girls for poking their noses into other people's affairs. It could have all passed quietly, just one night. Did I have to shave for it? Everyone nodded, thinking it really wasn't worth fighting with my mother. But for the rest of the evening, I was teased about it. It was nothing, I could survive. The main thing was that they didn't actually make me undress in front of everyone. The next day, I forgot about it because Riley asked me out. He made me laugh all day, paid for a movie and a cafe. Everything was just as wonderful. And then he kissed me. It was my first kiss on an absolutely wonderful date with the coolest guy in school who I had liked for so long. You can't even dream of it. Riley was hitting on me very vigorously. We were together every day, sometimes walking until late at night. My mother scolded me because I always put my studies first, and then I completely forgot about it. I agreed and apologized, but it was Riley. I couldn't imagine my day without him. He often came into my class as soon as the lesson was over, as if he had teleported, and he publicly suggested going to the beach at the weekend. I was just about to say yes to him when they started laughing out loud. I didn't even know what it was at first. And then one of the girls said that if I was taken to the beach, I would get my fur all over it. Riley didn't seem to understand, and they kept telling me that I didn't know what a razor was, that I could walk around in my underwear in the cold, and that it would be warm from the natural fur. Have you ever been made fun of for something so intimate? How did you handle it? Much had been said about it. I ran out of the classroom, thinking that I would simply melt into the ground. Riley ran after me. I was crying. I was so ashamed that my private parts were discussed in front of the whole class. Riley said that it was all right and I didn't need to listen to bad things. But it seemed to me he thought I was bad now. I started making excuses. I explained about my mother again, that I knew how disgusting this was. And all Riley said was that he really liked me. Instead of all this filth, he started talking about feelings. We ran to his house right out of school. I didn't even think how irresponsible that was. We turned on a movie, but we didn't watch it at all. We just kept kissing and kissing. I completely lost my head, and I knew that anything could happen right now. Then, Riley whispered in my ear that I should run to the bathroom, clean up quickly, and come back for more. I felt like I was being doused in cold water. He said it so matter-of-factly, so cynically. While I was in the clouds, he was already figuring out what he was going to do with me. He brought me home on purpose for this. And he told me that he didn't care if I shaved or not. I flew out of his house like a cork and slammed the door. The days began to be absolutely dreadful. I received severe punishment for running away from school. All the unfinished tasks had to be made up. All my long efforts in the name of college could just fly away to nowhere because of some guy who just wanted to get into my pants and even was screwing his face up that there was not everything as he ordered. My mother forbade me to leave the house, and I wasn't going to. I had no one to talk to now, thanks to the girls and their sense of humor. I knew they were jealous of me, but it was so mean to tell my secret to the whole class. Half the school was laughing at me now. One of them came up to me and tried to apologize. They wanted to offend me, but they didn't think it would spread like this. The explanation didn't make me feel any better. And then she told me that all that was better for me. Like, this was Riley. Why would I have such adventures if my mom didn't even let me shave? I didn't understand at all what she was talking about. And then she explained it to me. I would have known everything if I hadn't had my nose in the books. Riley met everyone he could reach, and very quickly dragged all the girls into bed. And all the guys thought I was some kind of rare Pokemon. I refused everyone. I didn't go anywhere. So when we started dating, it wasn't just about Riley that everyone was picking up gossip. Because of me, too. If I'd been worried about rejecting Riley and ignoring him until now it was obvious. Really, I felt better. And then I got so angry that I told the truth to the whole class. They didn't ask me, but I told them anyway. That I told Riley where to get off because he was too weak to sleep with a girl who didn't shave. That I really didn't do it. And that my mother had nothing to do with it. I just didn't like it. And if somebody didn't like me, go to hell. I felt like a big weight came off along with this ridiculous lie. More embarrassing than listening to my mother was lying about it to please someone. After that, I really felt much easier. I felt more confident in my decision not to shave and in learning instead of hanging out. I'm what I like, even if I'm boring. Here's the story. Subscribe to the channel, there are many more stories. Put a like, click the bell icon, and never be ashamed of yourself. Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm 18 years old. Have you ever lived with your boyfriend's family? Would you be able to stay with them day and night without being able to leave? Watch the video to the end and find out how I was left without housing at the university, and I had to learn to live by someone else's rules. I had just finished school and wanted to go to a prestigious university, and I was interested in a specific university in the city where my boyfriend lives. Every night, I imagined how I got the news about the successful matriculation and was going with suitcases on the train, and Eric, my boyfriend, met me at the station with flowers. But first, I had to get a recommendation to the university, and I got it. After that, I was invited to a month-long preparatory course, and this was already an application for admission because these courses greatly increase the chances of being among the government-subsidized students. There were only a few days left for gathering, and I headed out to meet my happiness. Eric, of course. Eric was living with his parents, and I was supposed to get a place in the dorm. When I arrived, I went there first. The dorm was quite nice, cozy and clean, and it was located a few steps away from the university. But I didn't have a chance to live there. The manager said that the place had to be given to a foreigner who didn't know the language at all and had nowhere to go. As if I had somewhere to go. Have you ever screwed up big time? Write it in the comments. Although, of course, Eric's family always treated me well, and I could come to them at any time. But still, I was counting on the dorm, and here's such a bummer. There was nothing to do, so I asked my boyfriend to let me stay at his house for a month. Fortunately, permission was granted, and soon I was unpacking in my new room. Not the one where Eric lived. Eric and I were old enough to share a room, and both he and I wanted to, but his mom insisted that I stayed in the guest room. However, the main thing was not that, but that I had a roof over my head, and now I could fully devote myself to studying and not think about everyday problems. On the evening of my arrival, Eric's parents had a lavish dinner. I had to admit that his mother cooked just fine, and I had already decided that I would take a couple of lessons from her in the future. Either the hard road took its toll on me, or the nerves from the fact that my place in the dorm was given to another applicant, but
I ate in 3 throats. At one point, I was even afraid that I would be considered a glutton. After a delicious dinner, I was so sleepy and I went out like a light. In the morning, when I went to the bathroom, I almost smashed a mug that was standing on the floor right next to my room. I thought it was weird, so I went to ask Eric. What he said shocked me. It turned out that his mother put my mug under the door, implying that I hadn't washed the dishes, and she hated mess and dirty cups and plates and all that. At first, I felt wildly awkward and then somehow even offended. Well, I just arrived, did not settle in, experienced a lot of wild stress, moved into the house of my boyfriend, and it was clear that I was in a kind of prostration from all this, and the last thing I thought about was the dishes. But when the resentment passed, I felt very ashamed that I was causing a mess in someone else's house and causing discomfort to people who had done me so much good. So I decided to immediately correct and clean up in the kitchen, to do spring cleaning and thereby make amends. It was just the right moment. Eric and his parents were out shopping, and I had a few hours to spare. Thank God I managed everything and sat waiting for the family with impatience. The door opened, and his mother was the first to go inside. I greeted her with a face like a Cheshire cat and personally called her into the kitchen to demonstrate the cleaning. But instead of praising me, she just started yelling, starting to get hysterical. Eric's mother was like nothing I'd ever seen, and I could feel her every word on my skin. It turned out that it was not about cleanliness, but that after cleaning, all the items were not in their places. Eric came running to the screams and tried to calm his mother, but she was getting more excited than ever. I was in such a shock. In this state, I saw her for the first time, and I was very much scared of it. I didn't know where to go from embarrassment, shame, and guilt. Fortunately, my study on this day lasted until the evening, and when I came home, I hoped that they had already had dinner and went to their rooms. Eric's mother cooked chicken and was waiting for me. At dinner, she pretended that nothing had happened, but the air was bursting with tension. Eric tried to smooth things over with some stupid jokes, but it only made things worse. And then, suddenly, his mother said that she would make a list for me personally of what was forbidden to do in this house. All this while Eric's younger brothers giggled. Have you ever been in a situation where to be swallowed by the ground would be the best solution? Tell us how it happened. I needed to let it out, or I would have exploded right there. In tears, I called my mother and told her everything. About the room that was separate from Eric, about the cup under the door, and about screams after spring cleaning when I was working hard for several hours. But there was another problem. From all these worryings, I began to have academic troubles. I couldn't concentrate on my subjects. Lectures went in one ear, out the other. My mother listened and was surprised, supported me, said that I needed to abstract from everything and throw myself into study. I had just hung up when I heard Eric's mom scream outside the door. She asked me to leave immediately. She had brazenly eavesdropped on the conversation, and now she was going to set all the dogs on me. She shouted that she would not allow me to say such things about her, and that I was a nobody, and that I owe them, and all because they gave me a roof over my head and fed me for free. The whole family came running to the screams, and Eric tried to stand up for me, but then it came to him, and then his mom said, "It's either me or her." How could I let Eric make that choice? What for? I went and packed my own things. I was so sad and heavy at heart. On the one hand, I felt a sense of shame. On the other hand, although I knew that I was also guilty, but I did not think that I deserved to be treated like this. Was I so guilty that she could humiliate me like this in front of everyone? A couple of hours later, I was standing at the train station with my suitcase, and I had to take a couple of days off from university to collect my thoughts and decide how I would continue to live. Coming home did me good, and I only realized how important it is to have a home of your own where you are loved and expected. But a few days of rest passed so quickly, and I had to go back. And I didn't want to do it. First, I had to find a new place to live. I couldn't live in Eric's house anymore. Second, Eric himself never gave any news about himself, and I began to think the worst. Did he leave me? His mother must have whipped him, and now he didn't want to talk to me anymore. And if so, why would I ever go back to that city and go to university? While I was thinking about all this, the doorbell rang. Eric was standing in the doorway. He gave me a bouquet of flowers, asked for forgiveness for the conflict, and said that he was taking me, and now we would live separately. My parents supported his intention and promised to help me with the money. And then it turned out that Eric's parents also did not mind that we lived separately and also promised to help with the money. We found the apartment quickly, and it was a wonderful time. I studied, then came home, we cooked dinner together, chatted until night, and so on for days on end. And then, all of a sudden, Eric's mother appeared on our doorstep. She asked for forgiveness for what had happened and promised to come to visit. Such a load from my soul fell, you would know. I still need to establish a dialogue with her in case she becomes my mother-in-law in the future. Did you like the story? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you click on the bell icon, you won't miss new episodes. I wish you to achieve your goals and find an approach to each person.